Morning, everyone, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Chad Tourin here with Coastal Wealth. I've been working with my good friend Barry Haimo over the last couple of weeks, really kind of trying to figure out ideas to share some of the most valuable insights that we have with our clients, with all of you. And I hope you're going to find the information that we share valuable and useful, and to be able to utilize us as resources as any questions may come up in your lives or your business practices.
So my name is Barry Haimo. I'm excited to have this opportunity to work with Chad. We've been really kicking around ideas of how to bring value to people and share our knowledge and what gets us excited about what we do. Particularly what I do and what we do at our firm is we do estate planning and business planning. That is a niche practice in the sense that it's wills, trusts, probate, business planning, and asset protection, but it's a big universe in between. We help families plan for disability, death, wealth preservation and protection, and avoid a lot of the common pitfalls that happen either unknowingly or as a result of poor planning. So Chad and I have joined forces. We're excited to bring this to you. It's a series of several videos on various topics that relate to estate and business planning for business owners. And today, Chad is going to tell us about basically his top 10 list that we have come up with for business owners from his perspective, which I don't know if you mentioned, but did you mention?
Actually, thanks for teaming up. While you were talking there, Barry, I actually, didn't really mention exactly where my area of specialty is. And I'm kind of the perfect counterpart to Barry, because while he focuses on the legal implications and to some extent the financial implications of a lot of things we talked about or mentioned that he does, I really focus on working with business owners and high net worth individuals on the financial implications of a lot of things that go on throughout the business life cycle. Predominantly, dealing a lot with how do you exit the business in the correct way and set yourself up to do so in the most efficient way possible, while taking into account the tax implications of such transactions, such life events. And over the next series of videos, and hopefully throughout today, I'll give you a little more insight into some of the things that I'm talking about. And today, really, the top 10 things that I encounter typically when working with my clients in these areas. So thank you for the kind reminder there, Barry.
I still think it's not enough, though. I mean, you have like 17 degrees. I mean, aren't you a tell us the degrees? You have CFP or CPA or J.D. He's astronaut. Come on.
Definitely. I think my wife and I don't know if my dad would ever let me hear the end of it as I went and got another degree, but Barry's correct. I have a unique background as a financial advisor in that I practiced in two disciplines, actually, two professions, prior to really proactively working on the financial side of things for my clients, and that I am still a licensed CPA and a licensed attorney. And so the knowledge that I share with my clients really takes into account those different areas in the financial advice that I give. And it's one of the reasons why I enjoy working with people like Barry, is because we can speak the same language with our clients and really create that team atmosphere that in today's complex landscape is really needed. We really need all of your advisors coordinating and working together to make sure that the advice that they are giving you is cohesive, not contradicting each other, and is taking into account all aspects of your plan, not just focusing on a rate of return and things of that nature.
I would say the same thing. Our practice, we really coordinate with the professionals. We call it the trifecta of representation. It's a team sport in our minds. We completely agree and philosophically of how we approach, professional planning. And so it's a true treat to do this with you today. So if we're going to jump in with your top 10, I believe we both agreed to reserve the right to add to make it more than 10. Um, but basically, the point here is to just talk about it. This is not. We're just having fun talking about what we like to do and how we help people. So, all right. So I have the list here now. Chad, are these in order, or is this
They
just
are not in any order. Kind of the same way you just said, we reserve the right to add things to this list.
okay?
I was just free flowing when we were talking about putting this together, about some of the top 10 things that I encountered that um, ironically enough, most of these top 10 mistakes are avoidable if you're just being proactive about them. But answer your question, yeah, these were just kind of ad hoc. These are the things that stand out to me, and what were most pressing in my mind right now.
And the ones that are bolded, why are they bolded?
They really get me fired up, Mary. I've seen through personal experience, whether it's family, things that have occurred in my life, and it really gets me energized because I know that I can help people avoid these things.
I have to bold my list for next time. All right, so let's jump in. We'll go in order, but again, they're not in any order. Just number one.
And what you'll find too is a lot of them, um, they're not interjectable, but they kind of work together. A lot of the mistakes, some of them fit together, and like a financial plan, all the pieces have to fit together. So it's only natural that some of the mistakes really fit together, and can be grouped together as well.
Right. And I guess after we're done, we can put together some sort of list, like a bullet point list to give to people to download if they want.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So number one, um, about having a buy-sell agreement, but not funding it, or funding, but not having a buy-sell. What's that all about?
Well, I can't tell you the amount of times that I meet with clients and they've met with someone like yourself and they said, you know what, we have our operating agreement in place. We have our buy-sell agreement in place, which, by the way, that could be another mistake in itself of people thinking that they're the same thing. But they'll have they have their buy-sell agreement, but they don't really think about what would happen if they need to act upon that buy-sell. And so, just a quick example is, let's say that you have a business worth $5 million and there were two partners. So naturally, each partner would have about $2.5 million of equity in the business. But let's say it was a business that was very illiquid. Either maybe they're in real estate, or a lot of it is accounts receivables or different things like that, where there's no real cash in the business. They'll come to me and say, I have this agreement. And I say, okay, great. What happens if your partner either can't work anymore, which that's another mistake because most people only take into account one aspect of a buy sell, the death typically, not the disability. So what happens if one of your partners gets disabled or passes away? Do you have enough cash in the business to be able to buy out that partner's spouse or whoever their significant other or heir to their legacy is? And if there's not enough cash in the business, there could be a really big issue, especially if you don't like that, your former deceased partner's spouse. Most people don't like being in business with their former partner's spouse, especially when that spouse may not know anything about the business, but yet could have a lot of influential control in the decision making because of the equity that their partner had, their former spouse had. And so that paper really, that agreement, excuse my French, you can really like your what with it, because there's nothing in there to actually effectuate the transaction.
So let me kind of piggyback that with I guess a little bit more of a question. So when I do shareholders agreements, buy-sell agreements, I structure them in a way where I'm contemplating a few different scenarios. One scenario is that there's no insurance, i.e., they blew it in funding it the right way, leveraging their capital to fund it the right way, or in other words, I guess minimizing, reducing the financial burden of having to deal with that buyout later. That's really the issue. So I build that into my agreement.
Do it for pennies on the dollar now, proactively, as opposed to dollar for dollar later on.
But I don't do pennies, but I mean, that could end up being what it has to be financially. But
Right.
in one scenario where there's no adequate funding, I usually build in a provision where they come up with a value. There's a procedure for coming up with a fair value, and that's a whole another video of how we do that, and which ones will end up in litigation versus other ones. But once you kind of identify the value, then um, we come up with a payment plan, kind of like buying a house, percentage down, balance paid or amortized over a period of time. And if it's long enough, it softens the financial burden. But I think you bring up a good point that if there's no cash flow or there's little cash flow, you're not going to be able to pay those payments. It's just not going to happen. And so that's going to have to cause a problem. There's going to be a breach of the agreement, and you're going to end up being partners with the estate, the spouse, the beneficiaries, the trust, whatever it is. And that is not ever appreciated.
Well, I mean, I've seen it a lot where two brothers are in business with each other, and the spouses can't stand each other. It's ironic because they're all family. But that happens a lot.
Why?
Yeah.
All right. So on one hand, we have the scenario where there's no funding, but we do have a buy sell. The other scenarios I have are if there's funding and if there's inadequate funding. So if there's funding, it's beautiful because it executes swiftly and smoothly. Can you shed light on what that looks like if it's done the right way?
Sure. Like you said, it's as smooth as can be. It would be no different than, I'm sure, hopefully no one's really had to encounter this, but it would be no different than having life insurance on yourself, something happening to you and your wife getting paid out. It's filing a claim, you collect the proceeds, you pay out the party that should be paid out, and you effectuate the legal side of the agreement that you help your clients with. It makes it a lot easier, a lot smoother.
So the deceased, or maybe disabled, depending on if it's a disability triggered buyback, the deceased or disabled partners or their estate receives the payout from insurance.
Well, it really depends how it's structured, because it could be that the proceeds could go into the actual entity, and that's used to buy the equity out from the person. So it may not flow directly to the spouse, but it really depends on how the actual agreement's structured.
I think if it's a flow through, like an S corp or a partnership, it's always going to be outside. Than if it's a C corp, but regardless. So like basically, generally speaking, the money kind of goes to the departing shareholder in exchange for the stock.
Correct.
Stock comes back either to the company if it's a C corp or to the other shareholders of the pass through, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. And then of course
it doesn't, it's not bleeding a capital dry of the company, which is a big issue that happens when it's not adequately funded. You had mentioned inadequate funding. That's when you actually start into the capital of the business. And then that could, really have an effect on the ongoing sustainability of the business, in terms of going forward.
Right. So to give more context there, in that third option where there's inadequate funding. So you have funding. The partners were smart. They got a valuation, like a real valuation, not a Mickey Mouse valuation. Somebody who actually does that work. They get a valuation. It will hold up for tax purposes. It's right. It's accurate. But then 3-5 years later, they're growing and their business has tripled. They have inadequate funding now. They haven't, I guess, revived the conversation with you to update their funding needs. So that's an example of having adequate funding, right?
Right. That's why I advocate and I urge and attempt to communicate with all my clients about the importance of having an annual review, so we can have these conversations, see if the value of the business has changed, and then make those adjustments accordingly ahead of time, as opposed to realizing that you're really behind the ball on what you could have done for yourself.
Right. One of the things I do for my early stage businesses, startups and early stage, actual operating businesses, is in that first scenario where maybe there's not enough money for funding yet, it's just not economical. I'll do like a small down payment of the value once the value is computed, and I'll spread out the payments a long time, 5 or 10 years, quarterly, subject to interest at the AFR. And the reason why I do that is as we talked about, is to minimize or mitigate the financial burden to the company to have to pay that out, because the company needs to be able to survive to pay that out. And it's in both parties' interests for the company to succeed and continue and thrive, for those payments to be made, and the company to continue to be in business.
And
I can't.
to elaborate on that too,
Yeah.
another way when there really is inadequate funding in the beginning is you can fund this. It's never the recommended way in long term, but you can temporarily fund these agreements with a temporary term policy. Typically, these buy-sell are done with permanent insurance when you're funding them, but you can do it to bridge the gap from a funding standpoint with convertible term insurance, so that when the capital of the business allows, you can then convert that to the permanent vehicle so that it'll be sustainable for the long term of your business.
Not a convertible term. I remember learning about that. Um, okay. Would you, we could spend a whole session on this kind of topic I'm about to say, but let's not do that. Just quickly, like kind of a very, very Twitter summary. When you talk about the permanent whole life, whatever you call it, is that where you're kind of maximizing the overfunding to avoid becoming characterized as a modified endowment contract mech, and usually utilizing the cash value really versus the death benefit? Is that one of those plays, or is that a different concept?
So that really depends on the way you structure these permanent plans, whether it's overfunded or not, really depends on what the ultimate use of the vehicle is. Because one of the great things about a permanent vehicle, while it's, while the buy sell is in place, is that the business actually can utilize the cash value if necessary in the plan for business purposes. Actually, it could be, it's an asset on the books of the business that, well, one, they can utilize, you know, it strengthens their position, when going to sell. But yes, they can use the cash value for business purposes. And then if the agreements are structured correctly, these things can actually also be used as supplemental retirement for the partners, where let's say 15 years down the road, the business sells, and then they decide to transfer out the policies from the business to the partners individually. Well, all of a sudden now it's either a supplemental retirement vehicle, tax-free, by the way, that their family could use, or if they don't need the cash in there, it's death benefit now for their family as opposed to the remaining spouse.
When you say tax free, is that because it's a loan against the policy?
Yeah, it depends, obviously, tax-free depending on how you access the funds. And although it is true that first it's a withdrawal and then it's a loan above that, withdrawal up to what you put in, and then a loan above that, you actually don't end up having to pay this loan back. The dividends of the policy go back to paying the loan, or ultimately you can just not pay it back, and the death benefit that goes to the family would be reduced by the outstanding loan. But in times like we're experiencing, with market volatility right now, it provides a real nice, call it a flock to safety, if you will, where you don't, if you're in retirement, you don't need to be accessing funds from a equity-based retirement account. You can allow those accounts to grow back up, absorb the losses, and access your funds here. So it actually, we can have a whole entire other, probably 10-hour video on this, on how it maximizes your overall wealth distribution. But I think it's just important to know that it's another asset class and a tool in the tool shed that can be used to maximize your overall wealth distribution planning.
Chad's top 10 list number 2, which is not planning for taxes. I'm sure you may have seen this before, once or twice. What's that all about? Not planning for taxes. Why is that on the list?
It's on the list because most business owners only think in terms of, especially in the startup stages before they're developed, they only think really in terms of federal taxes. Well, there's two ciphers. One, they think in terms of federal taxes and forget something called payroll tax, because they're not employed by a company anymore, where it's done automatically for you most times. So they'll forget to make their quarterly payments. But the flip side of it is because, even if they structured so that they do it all at the end of the year and account for all those taxes. Well, their paychecks have been bigger throughout the year, and they're not remembering I'm going to have to pay the government at one point in time, and so they spend their cash flow as if they'd already paid taxes and kind of forget that they're going to become due.
Isn't failure to pay payroll taxes a crime?
Yes. And that's an interesting. It's interesting in light of the political landscape and the discussions around payroll tax right now that we're even having this. And actually, we had talked about these top 10 before the potential suspension of payroll tax and elimination of payroll tax has come up in conversation. But yeah, businesses do, they forget to make these payments.
Yeah, so I probably should have mentioned in my intro that I have a master's in law and taxation, but I kind of messed that one up. Next video, I'll make sure to mention
You gave me all the designations, Barry. You forgot all of yours.
I did. You know what? You weren't thinking about me, and you know what? That was selfish.
Well, hopefully we'll do another one of these for Disney.
We'll get it right. We'll get it right. So yeah, planning for taxes is significant. You're right. I mean that the startups, they're focusing on treading water. They're focusing on just surviving and extending the runway as long as possible. The last thing they're thinking about is taxes because they're not thinking like we're a formal organization where we're sophisticated in our planning. Like they're just not thinking that way. And I guess there's like a line that gets crossed when you do become successful in that business. I guess in the entrepreneurial world, when you develop a repeatable, profitable, scalable model, at that moment that I guess that happens, you really got to get that team in order. And they have to have you and I on the team, or else they're going to
experience a lot of CPAs as well. I mean, we've always discovered a good team of CPAs that we work with as well, because that really completes the trifecta that you had mentioned earlier on.
We're going to have a video with you and I and a CPA or two and other guests and other videos. And I think that will be a really nice way of just continuing to extend the knowledge and discussion over these areas.
And talking about taxes, it's kind of a side note, or subtopic is, I find a lot the improper classification of your employees as to whether 1099 or W-2. A lot, there are specific rules regarding that, and I don't hold me to it right now because I don't have the laws in front of me.
I do think guys tell us some right now.
Yeah. A lot of times people they'll classify everyone as 1099 because they don't want to deal with the payroll tax side of things. That really could come back to bite them in the butt.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think that really should be like number 2A / number 11. It's not on the list. I think it's a great point.
11. Yeah, we'll see how far deep our numbers go today.
It looks like we're probably going to have to cover this one over a series of videos. But that's good because I think we're having a nice discussion about these areas, and I don't want to rush it just for the sake of time. But you mentioned a really good point.
There's one thing we have on our hand right now is time. I guess you can say with everything going on.
In certain ways, except my kids are going to start screaming soon. So you mentioned the payroll tax. Putting aside the political nonsense about payroll tax, just kind of assuming that things are normal for purposes of this discussion. The payroll tax in part goes towards health insurance, Social Security. There are obligations under, I believe, the Affordable Care Act that organizations that have a certain amount of employees have to pay into the system. And so naturally, the response by organizations was, well, let's recharacterize our employees. I think the number was 50 or more. Don't hold me to the number, but it's 50.
I believe you're correct.
So say you have 55 or 60, you might want to just start saying, okay, well, these people are really actually 1099 contractors. They're not employees. I don't have to pay into that system. And so that's kind of what happened. And so I get a lot of calls with people kind of telling me how they're characterized. Their employees are characterized.
Real quick before you kind of go on is, it also, from a retirement planning standpoint, could really affect the business owner. Because if they were incorrectly classifying their employees as 1099s, so that they didn't have to make 401k contributions for them, maybe the business owner is only doing a SEP IRA for themselves or something like that, if the IRS were to come back and reclassify the employees, it could cause not just a payroll tax issue, but a potential issue in the 401k retirement planning landscape as well.
Because there is discrimination, and you can't discriminate
Correct.
among employees, right? Number 3 is incorrect entity selection. Can you shed light on why entity selection matters at all? Why can't you just knee jerk into going on Sunbiz, filing a company, and just crushing it?
Well, there's two sides to the table of this. There's the legal implications of the entity selection in terms of exposure to yourself personally, and there's also the tax side of it, because you can be classified as one type of entity for legal purposes, but be classified as another for tax purposes. It's very common that for legal purposes, businesses will be classified as a limited liability company, an LLC, but still elect S corp status for tax purposes, and there's financial reasons for doing so. In terms of not having to pay self-employment tax. But at the end of the day, one of the big choices also is: are you going to have a flow-through entity where the profits of the business are still going to flow through to you individually, or are you going to have a C corp where it's really two separate entities? You have the business, you have you, and there's reasons why, and there's reasons for and for not being a C corp. It used to be a lot less common that people would elect to be a C corp because there was a much higher corporate tax rate. But when the tax law changed and Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was 2017, the Tax Reform Act, that the C corp rate got substantially reduced, where now some individuals who are in the highest tax bracket could potentially make sense to have a C corp status at 20% tax rate, because less money would be flowing through to them on the individual tax rate side of things.
Let me add to that. The 2017 Act did substantially lower the corporate rate to make it what would, I would say, on its face look more attractive. But you got to do the math at the end of the day, right? Because if you recall, you have the double taxation of C corps, which is that the C corp is a standalone taxable entity. It pays its own taxes. It does not flow through to the 1040. So it pays taxes once. Then when the dividends come out to you as a shareholder, you're going to pay capital gains on them, which is the second taxation of that money. That money gets taxed twice.
Correct.
So it just comes down to whether or not, I wouldn't say it just comes down to, but one consideration is that, is the double taxation worth it? Because you still actually might be better off with double taxation than pass through, depending on your income and other factors. Another thing I would say is there are other non-tax reasons to do a C corp. I'd like to mention two, and one of them is really awesome and fun and exciting, and I'd love to have a whole session on it by itself. And that will not be the first one. The first one is that some things you can qualify for, some insurance-related benefits. There's benefits you can qualify for as a company that you can actually do more advantageously through a C corp than you can through other entities. It's a non-tax consideration. And the second thing, which I'm going to add to the list, actually, you can add to the list. I'm talking.
And one financial reason is when you're a C corp, the business owner can actually, if you have another talk about this, can actually executive bonus themselves money and get the deduction, as opposed to an S corp or an LLC where you can't do that to yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances that really go into the selection. One thing I'll note is that there's something called Section 1202, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's a qualified small business section that, if a lot of factors are met, a lot of elements are met, a company can sell after 5 years and have 100% of the gains be tax-free. 100% of the gains can be tax-free. A lot of hurdles, a lot of conditions, but a lot of interesting ways to use that for planning.
That's something I'd learn at a later date to learn. I'll
Yeah,
learn
I
more.
think we should jump into that. I think get some experts on that to come and talk. But that's a really interesting thing. I would correct me if I'm wrong though. When it comes to entity selection, as far as C corps go, in my opinion, generally speaking, you don't do a C corp.
Correct.
Um, the reason why I don't do them is I think you mentioned it actually a minute ago, is that there's other entities. They all have their advantages, disadvantages. We can get into that in a whole other video. I'll put my notes.
Just don't be a sole proprietor. We don't need another video for that one. Yeah.
We can skip that one.
Yeah.
We can
That's
skip
one thing I could tell everyone. Do not be a sole proprietor.
But I would like to talk about that when we do the entity selection.
Yeah.
But I would say C corps are not necessary unless you're going to be a publicly traded company. You're going to raise shares capital in a certain way, because LLCs can elect to be taxed as a C corporation, and so you can have the best of both worlds, both legally and tax. We'll get into that another day. But incorrect entity selection, kind of pushing aside C corps. What else comes to mind in terms of why that's just a total mistake?
In terms of incorrect entity.
Yeah, like because you know what, a lot of people go to their accountant. I'm not trying to knock on accountants or CPAs, but sometimes CPAs are giving the legal advice of which entity to form because they say, "Oh, S corp, do S corp," and then they just do an S corp, and then that's kind of the end of it. There's no discussion or dialogue with the attorney and the CFP.
Yeah. Well, from the legal side, I'd love to hear your take on the difference from the legal side of things.
Okay, I'll give you a Twitter summary, but again, it's a breakout session.
Because a lot of it comes down to the liability to the owner. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It does not. It does not actually, because here's why. So again, you're not going to be a sole proprietor because that doesn't ever make sense, really. So we're talking about limited partnerships and a variety of different ways limited partnerships can be organized because there's a bunch of different, numbers of L's before the P.
You didn't even get out to what with four limited with.
Anyways, the word, man, it's like L, double L, triple L.
Limited liability, limited partnership, or whatever.
Yeah, right. They're all interesting. They all have their advantages. I think that they're more traditional. They were used in the 80s for tax reasons. I'll get into that another time. There's LLCs, there's LPs, there's C corps, and I say S corp, but that's really a tax designation. It's not a legal designation. If you're an S corp, you're either a C corp who makes an election, or you're an LLC who makes an election. Legally, you're either one of those two. So, entity selection wise, all those types of entities have the same limited liability with respect to the business, except for an LP has a general partner as the managing partner. That's why the general partner is always an entity itself, because that general partner carries all the liability of the partnership. Pushing that aside, all of those entities have the same limited liability with respect to the business operation. So if there's a slip and a fall, or there's a breach of contract, or there's a employer conflict, it's all just a company liability. Where they differ, and where I think it's frequently overlooked, is on the asset protection benefits to the owners of the business. So as Chad, the business owner, Barry, the business owner, if I get sued or Chad gets sued, having nothing to do with the business, like you hit a Ferrari or something on the way home from work and your insurance doesn't cover it and they sue you for the deficiency, they're going to go after your assets. And on the list of assets, on that menu, will be your businesses. And they are not all treated the same. Some of them can be taken away from you to satisfy a debt. Others cannot. So there's very important asset protection considerations when it comes to entity selection. And I got to tell you, it's very hard to fix later. I have a lot of people come to me and they've already made the mistake of forming a C corp and making an S election due to the advice of somebody else or nobody at all. And it's really hard to do because if you're converting these entities, there's a lot of tax consequences.
Typically,
blow up in your face.
Advice. A friend of mine gave me that advice. How often do you hear that one?
What? Say again?
how often do you hear, oh, well, why'd you do that? And they'll say, oh, well, my friend told me that's what he did. I hear that.
Water cooler advice. I
Yeah.
call it water cooler advice. I hear advice. I went to Panera's a couple times for coffee, and I just was listening to people next to me, and they're talking about wills and trusts. Oh, and my friend said to do this, and my friend said to do that, and I was like, I just kept my mouth shut. 'Cause I just don't want to deal with it. But yeah, water cooler advice. So entity selection, I think, is a whole window into another area that we could talk about. Number 4 is failure to max out retirement. I'll let you run with that one.
Sure. So, when you work for a company and you're provided with a 401k, um, the IRS has their limits in terms of how much you can contribute. And this so happens it's around 19,000, or it is 19,000, now. But when you're the business owner, a lot of times you want to be putting more money away into retirement than that 19,000. And so when it comes to structuring your plan, there's different ways where you can get to much higher limits than the $19,000 limit. Whether it is using a SEP IRA, which allows you to go all the way up to $56,000. Same thing with a solo 401k. Or you do some sort of, if there's a couple of highly compensated people in the business, you can do a 401k, but with a profit sharing plan on top. And so you as a business owner can still put away more than the rest of the employees without, as we, right from the beginning, we talked about discrimination. You can kind of avoid those discrimination issues if you have these plans set up correctly. And there's a lot of other things you do too. You can do cash balance plans, and I don't want to get too technical. We get an entire other conversation on the different retirement funding strategies for the business owner. But I think the big takeaway should be is that you're not limited to just the $19,000 that most people think they are, or if you are in business for yourself and you don't have a 401k set up and you don't have employees, many times people say, "Oh, I'm putting money into my IRA." Well, a regular IRA, because it does about a third of what a 401k could even do in terms of retirement contributions. So, you don't want to be pigeonholing yourself, or, a lot of times it's just due to lack of education about what options are available out there in terms of retirement funding vehicles for yourself.
Well, can you mention discriminatory, non-discriminatory, and where the distinction is, and maybe where the opportunities are as well?
Just, I'll really explain it as a concept. I don't want to get too much into the weeds in terms of the numbers, but there's discrimination rules with qualified plans, in particular with 401k, where if you have employees, there's only a certain amount you can contribute based on the amount that they're contributing. So if your rank and file employees aren't taking advantage of the 401k, even though you may be able to put legally up to 19,000, if there were no these non-discriminatory rules, you can severely be limited and end up contributing a lot less than that if your employees are not contributing or taking advantage of the plan.
Can I say that differently?
You absolutely can.
Because my understanding is that if you have a SEP, for example, which is an employer-sponsored traditional IRA. We should get into IRAs in another video too, like all the different ways of doing them. But if you have an employer sponsored IRA, what's it called? Small self-employed pension?
Pension, yeah.
Got it. So if you have a small pension, SEP IRA with your business, and say I pay myself 20% of my salary, which I believe is under the max, I have to, by law, give 20% of the salary of my employees to them as well.
Correct. That's
the way I say it, right?
And most times, I don't really see too many times where if there are multiple employees that the SEP is the actual arrangement, because of exactly what you said. You have to, by law, give the same amount to the employees. And that's typically where we'll get into other planning arrangements other than a SEP, usually when it gets more than one or two employees, because you don't want to be most times putting 20% into other people's retirement.
Well, let me give myself a little prop, a little plug here. Um, with our firm, we take care of our people. We really believe in people and the people on our team. Our biggest asset is our staff and our people and how we handle our customers. And I want to make sure our team is taken care of. And so we do a SEP, and we make sure that what I pay myself, I pay them, and that's understanding those rules is very important. They're
You are
complicated rules, I must
better
say.
than most, Gary.
What's that?
You're a better man than most.
Here's number 5. Chad's rules. Number 5. Not implementing things to retain and recruit top talent. Not implementing policy or procedures, plans to retain and recruit top talent. Go.
Well, kind of what we were just talking about. You teed it up perfectly with the fact that you do contribute to a SEP for everyone in the same amount that you do. And it's probably why you've had your business have the success that it has. Your people don't want to go anywhere because you're taking care of them. And I find a lot where for businesses to grow and grow at a good, sustainable rate, you can't stay stagnant. You have to be bringing in people. And, we're in a very competitive landscape. There's a lot of businesses out there that do offer good benefits. And benefits when I, with my individual clients, not my business owners, when I have discussions with them about, well, why do you work where you work? Or why have you been there so long? They mention a lot of times the benefit packages that these companies have. And, so you need to have them in place to be able to recruit the top talent that you're looking for. Now, the flip side is, well, what do you do once you have this top talent in your company? And there's things that you can implement. I had mentioned earlier how a C corp owner can bonus themselves or provide executive benefits to themselves. Well, most times you're providing these executive benefits to your executives, and there's strategies that you can put in place that one will provide benefit down the road to them and their family, but selfishly as a business owner, it also is a tool that you can use to keep them with your business, because you could set up vesting schedules where they're not entitled to the benefits that you set up if they're not with your company for a certain period of time. It's commonly known as golden handcuff strategies. And so these are tools used first, if people know that you have these benefits, they're going to want to come work for you. And then on the flip side is you can use it to your advantage as a business owner to be able to entice them to stay with you longer.
I want to mention 2 things. Number 1 is, as a business owner, I've studied the art of hiring. And I'm sure you're familiar with the cost of a mishire. Going through the process of hiring it's a pain in the ass, and
Hours spent on training and
it's expensive. Yeah, it's resource intensive. It's expensive, and then that's just the pre-hiring. Then you got the hiring.
And they make mistakes. If you get the wrong hire, it's another whole.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that you have to hire. You have these different segments of hiring. You have the process of trying to attract applications, reviewing applications, interviews, just to get somebody to say yes is a process. Then they say yes, and you got to start teaching them how your business works, your process, your people, your system, your handbook, and that's a process. You got to give them a year, to get into the system to see if they're gonna thrive in your culture. If they don't, you start over. But that's not where it ends, because you still have all the money you spent to pay them. You have all maybe the retirement benefits you paid them, the payroll taxes, the insurance. There's a lot of expenses that go into
everything together. Payroll, taxes.
There we go, full circle. So it's expensive to have a mishire, and there's books on that I've read that are great, and so that's where these things become very important. When you hire people,
that could be not even you got a top 10 book list, recommended book list.
I'm gonna put it down. I have the best book list. I think that is one of my most valuable assets in my possessions is my book list. Top 10 book list. So, having these tools to retain your people, um, it's worth it to build and hire from within and keep your people than it is to go outside of the business and hire and risk the probability of a mishire. You know, Chad mentions, vesting schedules, golden handcuffs. There's certain plans that you can put in place where like they're forfeited upon leaving. I have a couple friends of mine they have similar types of plans where they keep telling me where like I can't leave because I get this huge bonus at the end of this year. And it's
Or
every year it's the same thing.
or
And
if you're
it's
lucky, one of the 1 to 2% of the employee, one of the 1 or 2% that still offer pension plans,
yeah.
it's very hard to get those people to ever go anywhere because pension plans don't exist anymore for the most part.
And that's you don't want to have people who are unhappy or just staying for the money, but at the same time, there are ways to incentivize people to stay by really doing some planning ahead. So I thought that was a really good one to bring up. I had another point to bring up other than mishires, and I forgot what it was. So number 6, is there anything else to go over on that one?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. I mean, there's a lot of different strategies that could be put in place. It's probably the big takeaway. It's not a one size fits all. There's different strategies that could be put in place for different purposes for different people. Because the great thing about, we talked on the 401k side about the non-discrimination rules. Well, when you get outside of the qualified plan space into this executive benefit space, they don't have those discriminatory rules. You can pick and choose who can receive certain benefits. And that's really where, if you want that CFO to come or that COO or that high level, they're going to be looking for those kind of plans.
What was it? Was it, did you say it was a non-qualified plan or is that an executive comp plan?
Not non-qualified. There's a whole bunch of non-qualified plan. And by non-qualified, we're talking about outside of the 401k, IRA, SEP IRA space where there's the deductibility, the government, there's lots of government regulations. There's, we have another whole video on non-qualified deferred comp plans. And that does allow you to pick and choose who's going to receive these benefits.
I'm going to put this on the list. Put this on the list. I would only want to add one more thing. Tying this together to entity selection. Really, because when you're thinking about how you want to structure your business, for example, and this will be a whole topic for another day, but to keep it simple, C corps, S corps, they're limited in how they can be structured. Shares are like one of two types. Partnerships, LLCs, are very dynamic. They're very flexible, and they're predominantly used now for a good reason. They're so flexible. And when it comes to structuring your business to retain people, to attract people, to give them some skin in the game, there's so many ways to do it. That I'm going to bold that on your list because I want to talk about that on another time. And that's like vesting, investing schedules,
in everything, in the in the legal selection, the flexibility that that those entities provide, flexibility from a financial standpoint. You want your financial plans to be able to breathe and adapt to the changing landscapes.
right?
We don't know what taxes are going to be, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Tax rates can and do change. And so that's just one example. If you're getting, we talked about tax-free assets earlier. You have to have that flexibility in a plan where if tax rates even return to half of what they were in the 1950s and 1960s, that you'll have a part of your plan that can adapt to that landscape, and you won't adversely be affected by these economic scenarios where we have no control over.
And especially in this environment where we have so much debt. I mean, even in the last 6 months, I think we've went up by 33% of the debt, right? At least, we're going to need money. So you can expect the estate tax to come down. I guarantee the estate tax to come down and start capturing more people. The threshold, the exemption. Income tax might go up.
Yeah, that expires in 2025, correct, Bear?
I believe it does sunset, yes. Right now that's 11 million and change per spouse, per taxpayer. And it's not really affecting a lot of people. There's like 0.1 0.01% of the people in the United States.
And I'm stepping on maybe your top 10 here, but from a financial planning standpoint, I see a lot of people who think I'm not going to get to that number. And so they're not planning for that, right? But they may have, let's say it's a 35-year-old who has a business worth $3 million right now or has $3 million in assets. They're not taking into account the appreciation that those assets are going to do between now and the time they ultimately pass. And so regardless of
Right.
what that exemption amount is, they're going to be over it. Uh,
You're getting into my top 10 right now, but it's okay. We're gonna talk about it. Um, I have a lot of clients where they're kind of on the threshold now of the exemption, and it's like, what do we do? We're not subject to tax right now, but come November of this year, and come November in 4 years, what the hell is it going to be? Excuse me. So with that uncertainty, you got to probably do some planning. You got to do something because the tax on the excess of the exemption is about 40%, 40%. That's you want it to go to the government, you want it to go to your family or charity. I mean, that's kind of what it is. So you got to think about it, but not everybody's thinking about it because they're so busy and they're so wrapped up in their business and their life that they need people like us to kind of jolt them into reminders and sitting them down and saying,
I always tell people in the planning that I do that there's four unknowns that you need to plan for. Four uncertainties: taxes, what the market's going to do, how long you're going to live, and how healthy are you going to live during that life. They're all unknowns that
it's true.
really need to be addressed because those are the things that, regardless of what your assets are or what your account values are, you need one of those four things to go incorrectly, and your whole picture could be blown up.
I agree. I mean, that's what planning's all about is you're planning for the unknowns, and having a framework in place to navigate them.
And the good unknowns too, right? How many kids you're gonna have, how many grandkids you're gonna have. There's plenty of good unknowns too.
Depending on who you're talking to, it's an asset or a liability. But yes, the next one you have on here on Chad's list, number 6, putting all money into the business and not planning outside of the business. It's not bolded though, but it's a good one.
It almost could be bolded, and I do get fired up about this because it's the most common response from every single business owner as to why they're not saving retirement. And it's a good response in that the rate of return that they're getting on their money in the business is more than they're getting in the market or could get in the market. And they're absolutely correct most times in that assumption. Your business is your most valuable asset while you're running your business. But one day you're going to be out of that business. And the problem is that if you're not planning for retirement in other areas outside of that, what happens if you can't sell your business? If there's not a market to sell your business, how do you extrapolate the value from that, right? What happens if there's not someone inside of the business to turn the business over to who can keep running it and pay you out in installments that way? We talked about unknowns. We don't know what that's going to be. And what if you're in an illiquid business? What if most of your money is in real estate or something like that? There's no way of extrapolating the value. Well, if you're not putting money away into other retirement accounts, you may end up with nothing.
I would expand on that to, what you're mentioning is both exit planning as well as succession planning. Not having an exit or not preparing for an exit and not having a succession plan, a key person to take over for your family or a family member um, to take over. So that's all true. I mean, you're investing in your business. Your business is going to keep going, and then hopefully that materializes to something better at some point. But that's a risk.
The only thing, not to cut you off, is that the money you're getting from your business, while in linear year after year fashion, the return may be higher. It doesn't compound the same way retirement planning does, where your money is growing on itself every year. You're getting your money out of the business, but it may not be compounding in the same sense that it would in traditional, planning.
And that's because you're in your business, you're getting a return on equity. You're not getting a return on your money like you're compounding, right?
Exactly.
Got it. Doesn't Warren Buffett? I think actually Warren Buffett, or it was Freud or Newton or one of these people, wise people who said that compound interest is like the greatest eighth wonder of the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I always give an example a lot of times when I'm working. I do a lot of, as you know, I do a lot of financial education to people in graduate programs, and I always talk about the value of compounding money, and I always give this example. I'll always ask, if you started with a dollar and that dollar doubled every day for a month, how much do you think would be there at the end of the year? And people always yell out 1,000, 2,000. And when I tell them $1 million would be there, they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, yeah, dollars, $2 doubles four, four doubles eight. But when you get to those 25th, 26th, 27 days and 100,000 becoming 200,000, 200,000 becoming 400,000. And I know it's an extreme example, but it really drives home the point about what compounding does to your money when you just let it sit there and do the work for you.
Yeah, it's a really good example of two things, actually. It's funny because um, that's a bias. In one of my books, I'm going to share with you another date. It's called a bias, where you can't kind of wrap your head around something intuitively that can possibly be $1 million in 30 days. But when you put it on paper and you look at the data, it's fact. It's black and white. Um, the second thing is, when I was in school, we were learning about my law school estate planning and tax planning classes that I took. They did the same kind of analysis, but it wasn't, in terms of money and building money from, $1 doubling to get to whatever. But it was like a question on the board, like, would you rather have this or this, subject to the different taxes? And of course, everybody picks this one because it on its face looks like your beneficiaries would inherit more. But in reality, with the taxes and the planning the taxes, it was actually a different option. And it was really a way to reinforce there are these taxes to think about.
I use a similar example also because, when you ask people, okay, what's a good rate of return you might get on your money in the market? Like, oh, 8%, and I'm like, okay, that's a good return. But I'll ask them, what taxes are you paying on that money? What fees are associated with that account? And how much risk are you exposing yourself to get that 8%? Because there are plenty of planning strategies out there with a lot less risk where you can get a 4 or 5% return, but there's a lot less risk. There's no taxes. There's no fees. Well, at the end of the day, that's the same return as your 8% that you maybe were in the market. And people don't think about what's that net number. They're thinking of, the 8% is what you're telling your buddy at the bar when you're having a beer. Oh, I earned 8%. And they don't say, oh, well, what did you actually keep of that 8%?
Isn't that the age old saying in business? It's not what you make, it's what you keep.
Yeah.
People, that I see that a lot. All right, commingling. What does that mean? And why is it on the list? It's number 7. It's bolded. Tell us about that.
Well, it kind of also probably, I guess everything's tying back to entity selection a lot too. A lot, but commingling, really what I'm referring to is keeping your business accounts and your personal accounts separate. It's really important. Because if you don't, well, one is, how are you going to know, from a when you're doing your taxes, first of all, how are you going to know what was spent, how much profit there was? It's just inadequate bookkeeping, I guess you could say, is maybe another one incorrect bookkeeping. There could be tax exposure. There could be, the business could run out of funds quickly, if you're using it for personal expenses. Especially if you have a spouse who likes to spend a lot of money, and if the funds are commingled, maybe they're going to be bleeding the business dry and you don't even know it. And I'm sure you can elaborate on a lot of legal reasons why, but it just complicates the overall planning picture, in terms of projections. We talked about valuations earlier. I don't know how in the world you'd be able to do a valuation if your business and personal accounts were commingled. I think that's another issue in itself.
I think that's a great point, and I have other points to add on the legal side, but business valuation side. I mean, yeah, you're crushing yourself for getting the benefits of a favorable valuation. You're handcuffing yourself with respect, and you can confirm this when you're talking about getting a loan and they're doing the evaluation of how much money you make. Are you W-2ing yourself? Are you just where are you in your salary? Like it's very hard to.
Taxes there. There could be, all sorts of stuff. Or income tax issued, or is it distributions? Is it salary? Is it what is it? And I guess we can't understate the importance of keeping good records. It kind of ties into this too.
So I would say I would add. So all those reasons are really really good reasons, um, but they supplement the main reason, in my opinion. They supplement the main reason of why you don't want to commingle, and that is, just to kind of back up a little bit. We're talking about having a business. Doesn't matter what it is, partnership, limited partnership, LLC, C corp, S corp. Doesn't matter. If you start commingling and you start, going out for dinner with your friends and going to the bar and running it through the business and doing inappropriate business deductions, paying your electric bill, paying things that are clearly not business, then if you are ever sued personally, or even through the business, you're substantially increasing the likelihood that that business will be disregarded as a legal entity.
Brought me back to law school here. Just the piercing of the corporate veil.
Piercing of the corporate veil. They have a good name for it. Piercing of the corporate veil. It means in plain English that they can get through the business to the shareholder and go after the shareholder's assets because there's really no separation of business and shareholders' interests. And that's kind of defeats one of the very purposes for why people actually form them in the first place. One was limited liability, and two is tax and shareholders and structure. The flagship case that this kind of developed on was relating to Dana Highlight. If you remember Dana Highlight?
Yeah, I actually do remember this case.
Do you? It's Dana Highlight, and there was a valet parking, company that was doing the valet for Dana Highlight, and they just had an accident, and they kind of crushed somebody between two cars, and they sued, and there was all sorts of problems with the structure, and they ended up piercing it and getting at Dana Highlight as a result, and that was kind of like the flagship case.
Ironically enough, I back in high school, I used to go to Dana Highlight on I think it was Tuesday nights for dollar popcorn, dollar hot dogs, and sit there and watch some highlight. You're bringing.
I've been, and every time I go there, of course, I think of that issue, and I want to tell somebody about it there, but they don't want to hear me. They don't want to talk about that while we're playing highlight. So I would say this ties into
like every time I'm at, obviously it's been a while, but either the Fountain Blue or the hotel next to it, the Eden Rock. When they had it, was one of the first cases in law school too, was the property rights of the building going. They blocked the pool because I think even that
rights.
Yeah,
the air rights. That's an interesting one. Air rights. I would say that commingling ties into observing the corporate formalities. It's you want to make sure your company stays separate and distinct and protected, and that's just one of many. Number 8, it's bold, by the way, which is exciting. So not having a shareholder agreement, buy-sell agreement, and I know we talked about the funding component of the buy-sell agreement, but let's put that aside for a minute. The funding component of it. What is the significance of having or not having a shareholders agreement in a business?
Well, I mean, not having it, one, exposes you to potential lots of litigation amongst either former spouses. It could be litigation amongst the partners. Who's going to take control of the shares if someone passes away? How are the shares divvied up? How do you buy them back? So one, I think it opens yourself up to a lot of legal issues because there's nothing dictating who has what rights. So I think that is a big issue. There could be tax issues too if the agreement is not structured correctly. Kind of it'll brain freezer, if you will.
All right, let me jump in now. So, bottom line here, because you mentioned some really good points. Actually, you mentioned some really good points. The bottom line here is that if you don't have a shareholders agreement, you don't have your own body of law for governing the company. You're deferring to the statute to fill in the gap. And if it's 608 for LLCs or 607 for corporations, there's a lot of bedtime reading to put you to bed on all the gap filler. You're not going to like the gap filler. Okay, you're not. There's a couple things in there that are nice, but for the most part, it's not very good. And so that's why you want to have the agreement memorialized in writing, understood by the partners. That's like the bigger picture.
Like, how do the rules that dictate, okay, what's what procedures are there if you do need to vote a partner out, or what's the procedures for bringing a partner in? How do they buy in, with equity? How do they do that? They don't do an installment purchase. They need cash up front. There's all sorts of things that, at least on the front end and the back end, that need to be addressed.
Well, you raise a good point that, if you don't have an agreement, there's an issue of ownership, and it's less of an issue, I think, for a C corp or S corp, because you probably got your tax returns to back up ownership. I mean, you can't say that the ownership is different than what you filed on your federal tax returns. That's a whole other bag of chips. But LLCs can be changed every year. You can change your ownership. You can change your allocations of profits, losses, distributions. So that's subject to interpretation. But when it comes to ownership, control, management, meetings, allocations, who's working in the business, who's not, who has the rights to tell people they can't work. Those are issues. I would say in parentheses right here, we have, I think, what I would call very important issues, and I think that you were going to touch on them as well. In the event of disability and death, what happens if you're in a partnership or you have a business and your partner becomes disabled? Well, hopefully you have a disability policy to kick in, so that this person who's disabled can have money to help them live. But if not,
and to add to that, do you have the right disability policy in place? Because I've seen times where the wrong contract language is in that policy, and that's what people don't understand, is that a disability policy is nothing more than an employment contract in the scenario that you can't work, and the language in those policies will dictate what your income is going forward. And I've seen what happens when you have the wrong language. I've seen, from a personal story where I had a family member who got bought out of a business, and his benefits stopped after 2 years because it was the wrong language in the policy. And so it's really important to make sure that you're consulting with a professional who understands the contractual nuances of these vehicles that we've mentioned about, the legal entities we've mentioned, because there are nuances to all of them.
I would add to that, and I added it onto our list, because I think it's an important one. The people, they shop for insurance, and they usually shop on price, and they usually get exactly what they pay for, and that they have no idea what they're getting. They don't read the policies. Find me somebody who's read their policy, and I will take them to lunch. That doesn't happen. Frankly, I haven't even half my policies. People don't do it. They do it. They buy it on price. They don't even know what they're covered for. And when push comes to shove and there's a claim, you're rolling the dice on whether or not that claim is going to be covered. And your agent, if you're not working with a professional, they sold you what they sold you. They don't know what you need. So that's a concept I think we need to explore together. But going back to disability, and death of a business, business owner, we're talking about providing for the departing member to make sure that they can survive in a meaningful and with honor. Also, not dragging the business down because you're down a person. You're down a person, and if you have to keep paying that person, you're not going to be able to, fill that need, that role.
And we talk about also, how do you, if you have, because if that person's a partner, they're also likely a key person in the business. Well, all of a sudden you now have to replace that person. So how do you do that without also running the business dry? So there's ways, different key man type stuff, where to provide the funds for the business to be able to go out and find the replacement for that partner and another expert in that area.
Yeah. So say, for example, you have 3 partners and one goes down. That person still owns their 33%. There's nothing you're going to do about that without an agreement.
Right.
They're going to be either disabled at home and working on their life, but they're still a partner. And so while you're, busting your ass in your business, when you make distributions to partners, they're getting a third, whether you like it or not. There's no way around it. The only way around that is to give salaries to people, and that means more taxes. And that gets complicated, and it gets kind of into a quasi-ethical situation. So take, for example, the person passes away. Okay, well, there's now an estate that has to be involved with respect to that person. That's where I come in next time, talking about estate planning and probate. You don't want an estate, by the way. You do not want an estate involved in your business. Um, but take for example, you have an estate. Some person passed away. You have beneficiaries now that are going to become your partners. You now have new partners. Hello, my name is John, and I'm your partner. I know nothing about your business, but I'm really excited to get to know how things work. And
What other partner you don't want, just like Uncle Sam?
there's three. There's Uncle Sam. There's four. There's Uncle Sam. There's spouse. There's heirs, and there's creditors in bankruptcy, which is the next thing I was going to get at. So, partner files for bankruptcy. Creditors come in. They horse trade. Eventually, you're in partners with their creditor who wants nothing to do with your business but to sell it, to get their money back. And now now you have a series of creditors that are your owners. You have no protection and control over this issue without the proper agreement, whether it's divorce, death, bankruptcy, disability. These are issues that will blow up your business and really distract you from your focus of what you are trying to do with your business, and the cost benefit of planning around it from the beginning versus addressing it later when it's an issue is night and day. It's just I want to shake people.
A lot more expensive to address on the back end, that's for sure.
And we're happy to do it. We're happy to do it. We'll make a ton more money. We'll help you through the process. We'll give you the support you need, but you're going to pay us exponentially more to deal with this problem later than you will up front. But this is what goes into the agreements, and that's why it's really important, among many other things. So I'm actually looking
right. Is a lot of time people go into business with a friend or a family member and think they don't need one of these agreements in place because they trust the person unquestionably. Trust is that trust becomes a weird thing when the business goes from being worth nothing to being worth $20 million, and there's money behind people's motivations. You need to have these agreements in place because things do go wrong.
I have business interests. I'm very entrepreneurial, business minded. I have a lot of business I'm involved in as general counsel and advisor. And I've experienced that issue personally where a very close friend of mine, we trusted, we went in 50-50 and we had an agreement, but it wasn't enough for the issues that we came up with. It's just sometimes they're not enough, but I've experienced it. And it's a problem, and if you don't have an agreement, it's going to blow up even worse. So I can share more about those, experiences that I've had with my businesses and how I can, give that insight to my clients that I work with to help save them the trouble. So anything else to share about not having a shareholders agreement in your mind?
Yeah, don't make that mistake.
Don't make that mistake. I guess I would just add one more thing to that would be, it's not just about, the death, disability, bankruptcy, or
it could be, hey, if someone wants to retire from the business.
I should add that retirement. What if a partner wants to sell to their neighbor, for $1 million or for $1? There needs to be a mechanism in place to, again, keep it in the family, so to speak. That's called a right of first refusal. You'll see that very commonly in agreements. There's also management and who's going to be in control, who's not in control. There's liquidation. There's allocations of profits and losses. These agreements, if they're done right, they're fairly long, but they're comprehensive, and they're the kind of thing where, like, you do it, you agree, you do it in the beginning when everybody's excited, when everybody's really excited, they're optimistic, they're going to make $1 zillion, they're going to be the next Google. You put it on paper, you put it in the drawer, and you hopefully never have to look at it again. To wrap up this session, we're going to do a follow-up. We're going to finish Chad's top 10, which is now top 18. And we're going to get into Barry's top 10, and we're just going to keep overflowing like that. We're going to continue to beef up the topics. We're going to bring in some guest speakers. We're going to just continue just having fun doing what we're doing. Because you know what, quite frankly, I had a lot of fun talking to you today.
This is a great way to spend the day so far.
It's a great way to start the day. Any questions, any feedback? I would say you're welcome to send it my way unless you object. You can send it to info@haimolaw.com. That's HAIM as in Mike, OLAW.com. Give us your feedback. Critical, not critical. We want to hear it. We want to make all.
Topics you'd like us to talk about too. Feel free.
What's that?
Well, I said, or if there's topics you'd like us to talk about.
Yeah, whatever you think, would be helpful. If it will help enough people and we can get excited talking about it, we'll do it. So thanks for tuning in. Chad, thank you for joining.
We'll see everybody soon.
We'll do it again, right? Talk soon.
Have a good one.